This is Senior Algebra, Section 1.5 and 1.6. Today we're dealing with operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, here with some negatives here. So the first thing we're going to start with is the definition of subtraction here. You've seen this before, so let's recall that x minus y, when we're subtracting, it's really adding negatives here. If I have a problem, something like 10 minus 7, of course we know the answer is 3, but we can write that as an addition problem. 10 minus 7, we could rewrite it as 10 plus negative 7 there. There's many different ways to use the negative symbol there. Subtraction to represent negative numbers, such as negative 10, and represent the opposite of a number. So taking a look at example 1, we have 9 minus 4. Again, we know the answer is 5, but let's take a look. We know we can add the opposite. So I change subtraction to addition. I add the opposite. The opposite of 4 is negative 4. Now at this point, multiple ways to look at this. Some people like to use a number line. Go to 9 at the positive, so there's 5. And I go to 9, so it's 9 positive, so that's where I'm starting. And then negative 4 means I would go back 4 to the left 4. That would put me at 5. So that's one way to do it. Some other people like to kind of think of it this way, as pluses and minuses, positives and negatives here. And they kind of cancel each other out. So I have 9 positives, I have 4 negatives. When they kind of cancel each other out, what am I left with here? In this way, when I have 9 positives, 4 negatives, which do I have more of? I have more positives. How many more positives do I have? I have 5 more positives. If I look at B, it's 6 minus 14, or 6 plus negative 14. That's negative 8. When I think about it, I go, which are there more of? There's more negatives. How many more negatives? 8. So the answer is negative 8. In C, I have 5 negatives, 4 negatives, so I get 9 negatives. In D, minus a negative here. I'm going to add the opposite. Now the opposite of negative 3 is a positive 3. So 7 plus 3 gives us 10 there. In E, minus a negative again. So negative 2 plus 10. There's more positives. How many more positives? 8 here. In example 2, I'm going to do on the inside first, 8 plus 3, which gives me 11. The brackets there, same thing as parentheses. So I have negative 6 minus 2 minus 11. 2 minus 11 is our negative 9 here, and again, plus or add the opposite. And now I have minus a negative. I add the opposite. I change it to addition. And negative 6 plus 9 gives me a positive 3 there. Again, there's 3 more positives than negatives there. Some multiplying and dividing things here. Now, there's a couple different ways to look at this. For multiplication division, because division is really multiplying by the reciprocal, the rules are the same. So, for any two numbers here, okay, a positive times a positive is a positive. Okay, we've seen that before. Positive times a negative is a negative here. So when I have 3 times 4, I'm going to get a positive. When I have a positive times a negative, that could be 3 times negative 4 or negative 3 times 4. My answer is negative here. Now, when I do a negative times a negative, the answer is, not a negative. It's going to be a positive. Okay, the opposite of a negative, kind of, if you want to think about it like that. So if I was to do negative 3 times negative 4, I would get a positive 12 there. Okay, it's going to be positive. Some other ways to look at it. The product of two numbers having the same sign. So if I look above, 3 and 4, they're both positives. The answer is positive. Negative 3, negative 4, same sign. The answer is positive. If they have different signs, it's negative. And when I'm multiplying 2 or more numbers, if I look, there's an even number of negatives, the answer is positive. There's an odd number of negatives, the answer is negative. So if I'm multiplying a negative times a negative times a negative times a negative times a negative, I simply have to look at how many negatives I have. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. That means the answer is negative. So in example 3, some multiplying here. The first one, negative 9 times 2 minus negative 3 times 2. I'm going to start with my multiplication here. Negative 9 times 2 is a negative 18. Now at this point, I'm going to do the negative 3 times 2 first. I'm going to leave that subtraction there. We can think of it a little differently, but right now we're going to leave it as subtraction. Minus a negative, add the opposite, so it's a positive, and I get a negative 12 for my final answer there. In B, negative and a negative is a positive there. A negative 3 times a negative 4 is a positive 12. Now, if you just did 3 times negative 4, that would be fine, but then you'd have to have a minus and then a negative 12. Minus a negative would be a positive there. Either way, you're going to get a positive 12 and 24. In C, this is one, I have a couple different ways to do it. I can count up the negatives. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives. That's an even number of negatives, so the answer is going to be positive. 1 times 2 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Well, 1 times 2 is 2, 2 and 4 is 8, 8 and 3 is 24. 24 and 2 is 48, and 48 and 1 is 48 there. Now, I could also look at it this way and think of it, okay, if just two numbers. A negative 1 times a negative 2 is a positive. Negative times a negative there is a positive. Negative times a negative there is a positive. So I'm really just multiplying those three positives together. In D, I have a division problem. Remember, when we divide, we multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal is, of course, when I flip the negative 4 sevens and I make it negative 7, or negative 7 over 4. I put the negative on the bottom there. When I multiply across, I get negative 14 over negative 12, and I look and I have a negative on the top, negative on the bottom. So the same rules apply. A negative divided by a negative is a positive here. I also look to simplify 14 and 12. You could have done that before, and I get 7 over 6. Example 4. In this one, we're substituting some negatives into problems. These are ones that give students some difficulties here. So make sure that you follow this first step. Plug it in first. So I have the negative there. Negative, parentheses, something squared, minus 4, parentheses, minus parentheses here. So now I'm going to plug in my numbers. X is negative 3, so I put them into the first two, and y is a negative 5. Remember, that negative outside of the negative 3 squared really means a negative 1. So it's negative 1 times negative 3 squared. Negative 3 squared is 9 here, so really I get a negative 9. I look at the next one, I have a negative 4 times a negative 3, or I could think of it as plus negative there. I'm going to get a 12, so it's a plus 12 or positive 12. And minus the negative, that really means plus. That's going to be a 5. At this point, I'll put the negative 9 and 12 together to get a 3, and 3 plus 5 gives us 8 for my final answer. Last couple to do, we have some word phrases. Okay, this is about recognition of what does it mean when we say sum, when we say quotient, product, that type of stuff. Oh, the first one here, it says twice the product. Twice the thing. Okay, that means 2 times something, 2 times the product. Product means what I get when I multiply. Well, what 2 things am I multiplying here? In this case, the product of negative 3, okay, and a number. Do I know what number it is? No, so I'm going to use x here. So I have the negative 3 and a number, that's x. Is, that means equals, and 5. At this point, I could be done. If I wanted to simplify it a little bit, I could. But for right now, we could leave it just like that, and that would be fine. If we did simplify it, negative 6x equals 5, and then we could solve it from there, of course. In this case, you don't have to solve it for this one. In B, the product of 4 and the sum of a number and 5 is less than 10. Product means multiply. What 2 things am I multiplying? Now look at the prepositional phrase of 4 and the sum of a number. and 5. So of 4 and the sum. 4 and the sum. So 4 times the sum. The sum is what? What I get when I add. So what two things am I adding? A number and 5. Is less than, and then we get 10 there. So again, the 4 and the sum, that's what I'm multiplying. What is the sum? What I get when I add x and 5. So the last one, see here, the quotient. Quotient means divide. What two things am I dividing? 6 and the difference. Okay, so 6 is going to go on the left side, so I'm dividing. There's my prepositional phrase. 6 and the difference. Well, what's the difference? That's what? The answer I get when I subtract. So there's my subtraction. What two things am I subtracting? 3 and x. Is greater than or equal to? So I'm going to use that inequality and the opposite of 9. Well, the opposite of 9 is a negative 9 there. Now, one other way I could write it would be 6 over 3 minus x greater than or equal to negative 9. Either way would be fine.